Shostakovich, of course, was a precocious musician. I mean, his first symphony he wrote when he was still at college as a teenager. Incredible to think that. So you're dealing with an extraordinary musical mind. And yet, when it comes to the string quartet, he waited. I like to think that he had this feeling of Beethoven looking over his shoulder, and you know, the string quartet is this revered type of music that composers think twice about composing. He'd already written 5 symphonies before the first string quartet, and it was really the birth of his son that kind of inspired him. It gave him somehow, I don't know, a new joie de vivre. Brodsky Quartet is now in its 44th year. Way back then in 1972, one of the very first pieces the quartet came to love was indeed the third quartet of Shostakovich. But back then it was extremely difficult to get that music. They were so taken with it that they used to look out for performances of his quartets on the radio, and then went on to actually write down the parts off the tape. And by the time it got to the late 80s, we were playing the whole cycle. And this, of course, is in many ways where the quartets come into their own, because there is no musical journey quite like the journey of the Shostakovich quartets. This first quartet is very simple music. A lot of solo lines, little folk tunes, a snow scene, this sort of thing. It's in C major. And it really is, you just feel he's like dipping his toe into the sea of string quartets. Then you get the second quartet, where he says to the world, you think I can't write a string quartet? Check that out. There's a string quartet. It's an astonishing piece, written dedicated to his friend, the composer Shebalin. He wrote it in 19 days. It's just astonishing. And everything about it is virtuosic, the whole concept. It's only really by the third quartet, this very famous third quartet, where from the opening bars, you know this is Shostakovich. Suddenly he's got all this out of his system, and now he's arrived in his true voice. A nice thing about the quartets is that he had an idea to write 24, one in every key, as he did with the piano preludes. And so he started off in C major, this very happy, simple key, and then he drops in thirds, C to A, F, D, B flat, and then finally he gets to G. And at this point in his output, tragically, his first wife dies very unexpectedly. And suddenly from G, he goes to F sharp for the seventh quartet. So he breaks this little trend. Then, of course, number 8. Number 8 is his own epitaph. Very, very seriously, his own epitaph. He was contemplating suicide at that time in his life. And for that piece, he chooses C minor. Of course, synonymous with Beethoven, this C minor. Pathos, tragedy, all these emotions. He has a terrible marriage, a very short-lived second marriage. Shostakovich was not good at kind of domesticity, He needed someone to look after him. And I think he took the first girl he could find. It didn't last very long. However, the good news is that he then met a third wife, Irina, who is still with us, and we've met her, and she's a wonderful woman. And you could see why he was inspired to write his ninth quartet. And he chose, again, this Beethoven key, but this time E-flat, Eroica. And it's such an extraordinary piece. As we progress through, you get to the 4 quartets that were dedicated to the members of the Beethoven Quartet, 11, 12, 13 and 14. One exploring, I suppose, the characters, not only of the players, but of the instruments. Number 13, which is for the viola. That's an astonishing piece, and that's one, maybe of the whole 15, where it's the most kind of hopeless, it's the most desolate. And finally, you get to number 15. And here, quite frankly, you have it's a completely unique utterance. It's one of the most extraordinary pieces of music written by anyone. And it is this amazing kind of commentary on life itself. It's a succession of adagios, only broken by 2 molto adagios. And of the first movement, Sjostakovitsj once said, of course he had a great sense of humor, but of the first movement he once said, it should be played so that the flies in the room drop off the window panes. And I know what he means, because it's not that it's boring, far from it. It's that he achieves this amazing suspension of time. He manages somehow to suspend time, and it's hypnotic. And when you stand back off the whole cycle 1 to 15, it was meant to be. It's extraordinary, because he doesn't, although he wanted to write 24, how could you? This thing is so perfect architecturally, starting with the birth of his son, ending with this amazing commentary on life itself and our own existence here. In the middle, you have the man himself, flanked by 2 of his wives, and he's got some of his best friends in there, composers, musicians, all taken care of in this extraordinary musical feast.